Was from Edinburgh. I was actually in town to give a talk at the Royal Bank of Scotland, which sounds rather dull, but someone who attended my talk, it just happened to be the same time as the Fringe Festival. And someone who attended my talk tweeted out that Dr. Ming was the funniest thing at Fringe Festival this year, which surely is an insult to everyone that was actually attending the festival. But it really tickled me to think that my talk about artificial intelligence to a bank was the funniest thing to happen in Edinburgh that weekend. So I'm going to give a talk, and it's going to be about building superpowers, because in a funny sense, that's why I became a scientist. I started my life as what's called a theoretical neuroscientist, my professional life. I wasn't born this way. Actually, a lot of who I am, I was born as, but so we use artificial intelligence, machine learning, to study the brain. And in fact, nowadays, I sit on the boards of a large number of neurotechnologies companies that are actually building technology that either you stick on your head and it transmits signals in, or actually goes inside your brain. And most of what we're trying to do is understand, how do we treat something like Alzheimer's? Or how do we help kids that have had severe brain injuries? Or even people that are locked in and they not just paralyzed, but in no way can communicate with the world outside their body. And we're developing technologies to allow them to talk to the people around them. And when I interviewed to do my PhDs, I went around and picked which school I wanted to learn how to be a scientist at. And the existing professors would ask me, what did I want to do? What did I want to research? I told them cyborgs, and they thought I was completely crazy. But nonetheless, it sounded so exciting that I got to go anywhere I wanted to, and I got to study about cyborgs, or more accurately, theoretical neuroscience. And after I was a scientist for many years, I thought, you know what? I don't want to just study it. I want to build them. And so I started a company. A company used AI in education. And then I started another one, and then another one. I've started 6 companies. They're all about understanding people, things that are fundamentally human, using something that is almost completely not human, which is artificial intelligence. I've also been the chief scientist at 2 others. People have tried to recruit me to be the chief scientist of companies like Uber and Amazon, but apparently I was wiser than them and said no. I don't think any rational person wants me in charge of Amazon. But it was a wonderful message. They said, Dr. Ming, in 7 years, we're going to be a 1 million person company, and your job would be to make their life better. So I actually flew up to Seattle and I met with everyone. You know, how could you say no to the chance to make 1 million lives better? Unfortunately, I think Jeff Bezos' definition of better is different than mine. So it didn't happen, but nowadays I get to do whatever we want. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit at the end, but I thought I'd start by focusing on a couple of stories. And in fact, we can even start with this right here. So if any of you are as nerdy as I am, you may know already what this is. This is Google Glass, essentially a smartphone built into a pair of glasses. And when Google originally developed these, they reached out to a few people to come up with ideas about what to do with them. And what I told them is, you need to build a superpower. If you want people to wear a fluorescent blue computer on their face, you had better build them a superpower. Why would they do it otherwise? To share social media? we're all pretty good at that with our phones. Build something that transforms people's lives. So let's kick off the slides here. If we haven't already, I don't know, I'm not seeing slides. And there we go, building superpowers. And we can go right to that next picture. And there we are. So when I was in the midst of one of my most successful companies, where we were building AI to try and ignore whether you went to Oxford or Cambridge or Harvard or École Politique or whatever it might be, what we really wanted to know was, are you an amazing person that's going to change the world? That's what companies should be hiring for. Not, are you rich? Or do you have the right accent? Or anything else. It is, will you make a change in this organization? And so I got to help build a company, and we got to be the cover of the New York Times and the magazine called The Atlantic. We got written about all around the world. And I actually got invited. I got invited to the White House, not the current White House with the weird orange gremlin in it, but as you perhaps can see here, the previous one, the Obama White House. So my wife and I went to Washington, D.C., and we went into this big party, and it was amazing. And one of the things was I was wearing my Google Glass with this ridiculous blue computer on my face. Now, I swear that I asked permission first. And as you will learn, there's a very good reason I looked like a complete idiot at the White House. But I swear I asked for permission, and we got in, and I'm wearing a live camera with a computer on it on my head. And my wife and I immediately make our way to the hors d'oeuvre table where all of the little treats are, because it turns out the White House throws a really good party, and it doesn't have to end when you leave. So we were taking all of the fancy little foods, particularly the desserts, and we were hiding them in our purse. I do not recommend that you do this at home. Generally speaking, don't steal from world leaders. They're not always so forgiving. And in fact, this enormous man with a fancy little earpiece walks up to us, and I thought, oh my God, we're busted. They're gonna throw us in jail for stealing food from the White House. And instead, he says, "Is that Google Glass?" And I said, "Yes." And he says, "Does it take pictures?" And I said, "Yes." "Does it do video?" "Yes." Now I'm thinking, does this guy want me to hook him up? Is he hoping that I will get him? Because we got this early release pair to come up with ideas. And in fact, I built a couple of them. That was the reason I was wearing them, is I'd already built a couple of superpowers. But in fact, all he says is, "Please don't live stream the president." Which in retrospect, yeah, okay. President Obama and Vice President, now President-elect Biden, were both at this party. By the way, I met President Biden at that party. He has the biggest, whitest teeth of any human being I have ever met on the entire planet. And I have been all around the world. He seems like a very nice guy, but oh my goodness, it's like meeting a horse. So the Secret Service were not very happy, but all they said was, "Please don't live stream the president." They said, "Be a good person, and please don't tell anyone exactly where he will be at any given time." So I said, "Sure." And they left. What I didn't know is that the Secret Service, the organization that protects the President of the United States, had completely freaked out when they saw that there was some crazy lady with a fluorescent blue camera on her head at the White House. They went berserk. And in fact, they wasted 5 minutes of the most powerful man in the world. Okay, let's be fair. Maybe the US president is no longer the most powerful man in the world, thanks to this weird orange gremlin that's been infesting the White House. But At the time, they wasted 5 minutes of President Obama's time to decide whether or not to kick me out. And he actually decided not to. In fact, he wanted to meet me. So my wife and I were at the party later, and we're just killing some time. And suddenly, the guy you can see here in the fancy uniform walks up to us and says, "Take one step back and stay right here." It became immediately obvious. The Secret Service was pushing everyone else away. You can see all of the pictures. And sure enough, the president pops out of this tiny little hidden door and stands up and looks straight at me and just shakes his head. "Oh, my God, lady, what are you doing?" He was so disgusted. But here's where I got to tell him why. And what's amazing is, so I took this picture. It turns out Google has confirmed this is the only presidential portrait ever taken with Google Glass. As you can see, it is, in fact, a terrible picture. It's not such a bad picture of Lord Nelson there, or whoever the heck that is, but of the president, not very good. You will note that Google Glass never really became a great product, if you will, but it was great at certain things. And there were 2 superpowers that I built, and I got to tell the President of the United States about why. So here's the first one. Go to the next slide, if you will. So when I was just getting started as an undergraduate, I thought I was going to be what we would call a wet neuroscientist, that I was going to record neural activity from animals and try and understand what the individual nerve cells in a brain were doing. And I took what is to date the only programming course I've ever taken in my life. And it turns out I got a perfect grade in the class. I got every question right. And the professor asked me to come into his office, and he said, "Congratulations, you got the best score in the class. And would you be my teaching assistant next year? But also, I have a friend who runs a lab called the Machine Perception Lab. And I hope you don't mind, but I recommended you to him as a research assistant." So, again, I'm still an undergraduate. I've never worked with machine learning before. And this lab was working on an amazing and truly terrifying product. They were being sponsored by the Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA, the spy agency of the United States, to build a system that could analyze faces and figure out where the person was lying. And the obvious starting point is to understand the emotions of the person in the film. So what you're seeing right there is another person who was at the Machine Perception Lab at the time, Marnie Stewart, and she is demoing the system that we built, where you could smile and you could frown, and in real time, it will show what the emotion is that you are expressing. This is very complicated. There are all sorts of ethical issues, not the least of which is it truly appropriate to build AI for spy agencies? But just understand, I was pretty young. I'd never worked on this before. And I built something that understood when someone was smiling, which feels like a truly human thing. When you look at someone and you see whether they're happy or sad or angry, never before was a machine able to do this. And we built a machine that could. And I got to admit, I was hooked. The idea that I could use machine learning to study people, not just to build a system that could do all the things, sell ads and try and make trades on stock markets, but machines that could understand people so that we could understand ourselves better. I was just hooked. So I got into this world of theoretical neuroscience. Now, a quick aside, that lab actually spun off as a startup. So all of our work on facial recognition became a company called Emotion. And Emotion struggled for a few years. This was started long ago. This is like 1999. And I know some of your parents may not even been born yet, but please don't tell me that. But way back when we were building this stuff, and this became a startup, and it kicked along, and it had a hard time. This may not be a part of many of your lives for a while, but it turns out inventing a really cool technology is not the same thing as inventing a use for it. Seems so obvious. You can tell if people are happy or sad, but what would you do with it? So they had a hard time figuring out what their product was. And then someone there had an idea. Now we're talking about 2015. And in 2015, America, just as it was recently, was involved in a presidential election. And someone at Emotion had this idea. What if we analyzed the presidential election debates in real time? And on YouTube, we show a video of all of the candidates and the emotions they're experiencing. Because, you know, does Donald Trump actually have human emotions? Is a reasonable question, and machines can help us understand it. So they ran this, and literally the next day, a bidding war started between Apple and Facebook. And Apple won. So if any of you or members of your family have an iPhone, that, all of its facial recognition, is my undergraduate lab. If you've ever done an Animoji or used your phone to their face to unlock your phone, we were working on that over 20 years ago. It took 20 years to take these ideas and make them real in the world. And I think there's an important lesson here, which is if you want to truly understand invention and innovation, understand this. $50 million in CIA funding, dozens of graduate students worth of dissertation work, 20 years worth of research now animates cat faces on your phone. So in the end, understand that no matter what you invent, it's just going to animate cats on the internet. You should just get used to it. There's no way around it. It's the way the world works. So, but in this particular case, it taught me how to do something that years later would be very valuable. What if we took Google Glass, and in this little camera right here, we used that to do this facial recognition and emotion processing? And you can imagine all sorts of bad things you could do with this technology. You could, for example, pull up everyone's Facebook pages or their WhatsApp accounts or their LinkedIn or whatever the newest, latest thing is. There's always some new TikTok out there. Or maybe you could pull up bad, incriminating evidence about them and dirty pictures or whatever else might be out there. I had a different goal because it turns out there's a group of people out there that you may not know it, but almost all of us know a secret language. And this one group doesn't know it. They can learn it, but the rest of us get it for free. And that secret language is the language of emotion. It's expressions on our faces. And the group that doesn't get it for free are kids with autism. And so what we did was we built a system for autistic kids to wear Google Glass. And in real time on the little screen up here, it would actually show the emotion that the person they were talking to was feeling. Now, maybe the only thing that does is that it lets someone that can't read faces, now they've got what we call prosthetic. They have a bit of technology that does it for them. But what we were hoping is that they could actually learn how to read faces even better if they could learn through natural interactions with other people. And they did. And they learned it better than the standard approach, which is still today largely cartoon faces on flashcards. Instead, they could actually interact with their family or their teachers or their friends and learn that a smile means someone's happy. And in fact, they not only learned that, they learned something else that we didn't expect at all. They learned empathy. They learned what it means for someone to be happy. They learned why people are happy. It turns out when you learn that someone is sad simply by studying a frowny face on a cartoon, you don't learn why people become sad. And in fact, we were able to transform the lives of some of these kids. So that was one superpower I got to build and just give away. Told people how to do it. In fact, the only 2 reasons people use Google Glass today is for surgeons who have their hands very busy and they need to look something up, and for autistic children. And I'm immensely proud that we had the chance to build that. But in fact, I had another reason, another superpower that I was using right there in the White House. If you'll go to the next slide. Oh, sorry. This is actually an example of the Animoji. So anyone that had never heard of it, you can see here someone looking into their iPhone and then an animated cat making the same emotions. Again, we talked about doing this in the year 2000, but it couldn't happen until you had the power of a modern smartphone in your hands to make it a reality. But the ideas were all there. A lot of innovation and invention is just putting the right thing together at the right time. But there's another big ingredient that we're going to come to at the end. So let's jump ahead to the next slide. Here we are. So I had this other thing I needed to do. You're seeing a picture here of my son, a bit younger than he is today. His name is Felix, and he's amazing. He's wonderful, and he's quirky, as you can see. He even has a little bit of mild autism himself. But there's also something else he has. And if you're reading the slide, you already know, but bear with me for the story. This was, oh my goodness, 9 years ago, almost this time of year, the US Thanksgiving holiday. This is a big holiday here. It ranges for 4 days. And the Sunday beforehand, Felix had the flu, maybe. You know, he threw up as little kids sometimes do, but he really wasn't feeling well. And so, you know, we're not callous. We checked in with his doctor, but everything seems to be okay. So we don't worry too much about it. And the next day he's feeling a tiny bit better, but still seems a bit sick. Can't quite get over this flu. And the next day he seems even worse. And then on Wednesday, he can't even stand up. You know, he was just a little kid. He had just turned 4 years old, and he'd lost something like 20 pounds, you know, 10 kilos of mass off of him, seemingly overnight. And it's near the end of the day, and we're about to enter the holiday. You know, what is going to happen here? So we call his doctor, and they tell us it's the flu, and we say, no, and we rush into the doctor's office, and they don't even need to actually do a test because they can smell it on him. He smelled sweet. They could smell the sugar in his sweat because he had diabetes, most specifically type 1 diabetes. So if you don't know what that is, there are a bunch of different kinds. This is an autoimmune disease. It's a disease where your own immune system destroys the cells that make insulin. And insulin is a hormone that all of our bodies produce that lets the sugar in your blood get inside of the cells. In other words, you can eat all the food you want and still starve to death because your cells can't get the energy they need to keep functioning. And in fact, the reason he lost all that weight is his body was literally eating itself to stay alive. It was consuming his own fat and muscles to stay alive, even though he'd been eating. So it was terrifying. I'd never had a chronic illness like this enter my life before. And so we rush into the hospital, and I spent, which is surely the hardest 24 hours I've ever spent. It was already the end of the day before we got the pediatric intensive care unit. And for 24 hours, they jabbed needles into him. They took measurements. He was delirious. He couldn't understand. They'd spend 10 minutes poking him with needles. I'd spend 10 minutes holding him while he cried. And then I'd spend 10 minutes on a little cot next to his bed in the light, the bright light of an intensive care unit. And then it would start over again every half hour for 24 hours. Because if they just gave him enough artificial insulin to bring his blood sugar back down to the right levels, it would cause shock and kill him. So they had to slowly bring him down. It was brutally hard. But when it was all done, we got to leave as a family. It took the whole weekend. It took 4 days. But there were quite a few families there that were clearly never going to get the chance to leave together. And we did. And that gives you a lot of perspective about how hard your life is. And then there was something else. My wife and I are both scientists. I may not be an endocrinologist, someone that studies the hormone system of the human body, but I am a neuroscientist, and she's a scientist as well. So we started collecting data. In fact, we have a spreadsheet, and the first few lines of that spreadsheet were goose, 89 grams, mashed potatoes, 189 grams. It was all there, everything he ate in that first meal back at home. Not just the weight of the food, but the amount of protein, the amount of fat, and the amount of carbohydrate or sugar that was represented in each of those. We weighed everything. We kept track of his heart rate in real time with a smartwatch. We tracked everything in notes. Thousands and thousands of lines of data we created about our son. And then a month later, I had my true first shock. Shocked as I was that my son had diabetes, my big shock was we're about to go in to meet with his doctor for the first time. And I thought, this is going to be great. They're going to love us. We saved all this data and we sent it to the doctor. Thousands and thousands of lines. And they never responded, which I thought really, really strange. So I thought, I know, because of course, everyone in the world is just as nerdy and geeky as me. I know what the problem is. And I printed out an inch thick, 2.5 centimeters of spreadsheets printed out on paper, and we brought it in and we dropped it like a Toy Story book on the desk in front of the doctor. And I thought, of course, they would love us. Oh my goodness, they were so angry. They were so angry that we were wasting their time. What am I supposed to do with this data? And I was shocked. I thought, I make models of the human brain. Do these people truly think that the pancreas, where insulin gets made, is more complicated than the brain? So that night, I bought a book on endocrinology. Again, I got some fancy degrees, but it's not my area of study. And I read that book, and the next day, I hacked all of my son's medical equipment. He had an insulin pump, which automatically, wirelessly puts insulin into his body. He had something called a continuous glucose monitor, which slowly reads every 5 minutes the amount of sugar in his bloodstream. And understand, I should have jumped ahead. Let's jump ahead a slide. Understand, my son was miserable. This is a picture of him at the hospital. He'd lost all of that weight. The little kid you just saw in that photo represented here. It was so hard. But he came back, and we turned him into a cyborg. I hacked his insulin pump. I hacked his continuous glucose monitor, his smartwatch, and everything else. Turns out I broke a whole bunch of US federal laws. You are not supposed to hack medical equipment. But whatever, I'm a mad scientist. It's my son. I'm going to do whatever I feel like. That's not a good lesson in life, but that's how I felt. This is my son, and I'm going to make a difference. I'm not going to continue. When the doctor asked us, when I gave her all that data, she said, well, could you just write down a few of those numbers? So she had us write down by hand 15 numbers, morning, afternoon, evening, for 5 days. I had 15,000 numbers. They wanted 15. And then they looked at it just using their eyes. And they said, okay, here's what we're going to do for the next 6 months. And I thought, no, I'm going to build a cyborg. I'm going to build a superpower. And so I hacked all that equipment, and I took a model I'd used to understand the brains. You may not know this, but did you know your eyes predict the future? Turns out, if we get really nerdy here and talk about things like Shannon information theory, what we see is that the best way to encode new information about the world is actually predict the future. And then you only have to encode what's different. And I thought we should do the same thing. Let's predict the future of my son's blood glucose levels. And then all we have to make a change is when it becomes different. And so I had the chance to build the first ever artificial intelligence to treat diabetes. And I think a little example of that might be on the next slide. So you're just seeing a representation, but this is real data. And I know this is probably not the most exciting visual you've ever seen, but the orange line is the real numbers for my son across the course of a day. And the blue line is a prediction the system's making. And you can see that there's little changes here and there that it doesn't get quite so right. But right now it's making predictions throughout the night. And it essentially is accurate between an hour and 3 hours into the future. My son's glucose monitor is actually telling me his blood sugar levels 20 minutes in the past. And we built a system that could predict his blood glucose levels 3 hours into the future. It was a transformation in how we could treat my son and make a real change in his life. And in a moment, I'm going to tell you the best part, but remember this. Remember the continuous glucose monitor. Remember the Google Glass at the White House. Why was I at a fancy dress party at the White House wearing a fluorescent blue computer on my face? Because on this little screen, I got a message from the AI monitoring my son that said his blood glucose levels would go low, dangerously low, in 30 minutes. I was in Washington, D.C. My son was home with my sister in San Francisco. I sent her a text message to give him some crackers, and he never went low. That is the power of being able to take a truly novel invention, something as immensely powerful as machine learning, as artificial intelligence, and use it to change a human life, not to replace people, but to make people better. And I will have to tell you, being able to do this for my son, I wish every parent in the whole world had that experience, or that you could be the one person that makes a change in your best friend's life. It is the most wonderful feeling. But there's a second thing I got to do. And again, it was the reason I was partially wearing this to the White House. It was because we gave it all away. I didn't found a company to sell people the technology to help autistic children learn how to read faces. I didn't take out a patent on the AI to predict blood glucose levels. We simply got on the phone and told everyone that would listen how they could do it. Not just people, not just individuals. I told it to the companies. If they made money off of it, I didn't care. What I cared about is that people would be alive. That the longer I waited to get this into the world, the more people would die. So we simply gave it away. If you'll jump to the next slide, I think we're heading towards a close here. So I told you I have the best job in the whole world. After having been an academic scientist, a professor, and then I was an entrepreneur for many years, and I'm proud of all the work I got to do. Nowadays, I get to do whatever I wanted. And when I thought hard about it, I decided I wanted to do exactly what I was already doing. I wanted to invent things and give them to people. And so I started this place called Socos Labs. And at Socos Labs, people bring us problems. Dr. Ming, my daughter has 500 seizures a day. Dr. Ming, my son can't enter REM sleep, a form of sleep that is required, frankly, for you to be alive. Dr. Ming, our company doesn't know how to promote women, or our country doesn't know what to do about education, or the UN doesn't know what to do about the ethical use of AI. Well, if I think my team and I can make a meaningful difference on any of these problems, then I pay for everything. And we go in and try and invent a solution. We don't work for anyone. No one pays us. We try and do something completely different. Because if someone's asking for my help, trust me, it's because nothing else has worked. And so we try and come up with a completely new idea. And amazingly often, we succeed. And when we do, we give it away. So you've heard about systems that we built to help kids with diabetes, and we're building a whole new version of that now to help people with autism learn how to read facial expressions. Now on the screen, you can see a bunch of other projects that we've done. One predicting manic episodes in bipolar sufferers, a terrible, tragic disease. And we built a system that just uses a smartphone, just uses an AI to monitor a smartphone. And we can actually predict, in some cases, weeks ahead of time when someone's going to have an episode so that they can actually get treatment before it happens. We built a system, you can see one with a bunch of faces changing in a grid. That's actually an AI learning its own language of faces. And specifically, that version was for a system to reunite orphan refugees. In refugees camps around the world, there are 1 million in camps today. And we built a system that allows extended family member to use something like an iPad or just a tablet. And within 3 to 5 seconds, they'll look at a set of faces and make some judgments. And if their niece or nephew is in a camp anywhere in the world, they found them. We built systems, algorithms to help deaf children learn how to hear, use AI to improve education. You see a social network graph up on the screen in different colors. That one we actually analyzed to try and predict how people interact inside a company. And we found something really amazing, which I'm going to come back to in a moment. But we did another social graph analysis, and we're able to predict ahead of time who would become a COVID-19 super spreader. Not who already had it, but who would likely get it and spread it to high-risk people. And I'm a neuroscientist. So in addition to the work I've gotten to do with deaf children and cochlear implants, I sit on the number of boards of companies like Hum, you can see in the lower corner, building a system that actually a little patch and you put it on your head, and for about 2 hours, you're literally smarter. It goes away, but we're using it to build a system for kids with traumatic brain injuries to actually get their life back, to improve their memory through training while we're doing the stimulation, along with other groups, such as people suffering from dementia, and even bigger and more ambitious ones. But let me come back to that social graph in a big company. We were looking at what it was that transformed the company. What had the biggest impact on all the money they made and all the things they invented and all the jobs they created that they weren't already tracking. And we found this really fascinating thing. We used AI to analyze 500,000 people and all the ways they interacted. And we found this thing, the single biggest predictor of productivity, all the stuff the company does, all the positive stuff, the single biggest predictor that they weren't already tracking was sacrifice. It was people doing something when they didn't have to, something that didn't benefit themselves, doing it for someone else, in this case, inside the company, even though there was no reason to, even though the company didn't track it, that there was no profit to be made, there were no dollars behind that, you weren't going to get a promotion for it. But the more people did it, the better the company performed. It turned out what we were measuring in all of that sacrifice was purpose. Purpose is the idea that there's something bigger than you. For some people, that might be religion. For me, it's a very simple idea. Live a life that makes other people's lives better. That's all I need. It's bigger than me. It takes, admittedly, more than a lifetime to complete. But along the way, you get to do truly amazing things. And the biggest indicator out in the world of sacrifice, again, measured with an AI, something so human as purpose, we got to use an AI to explore. And that thing was making a sacrifice for another person. So I built Socos Labs on the idea of, what if I started a startup that never made money, that only gave away? What if I did something truly crazy, impossible? How could you have a company that doesn't make money? And all we do is give. And it is its own experiment. And we've been doing it now for nearly 5 years. And every year we get to help more people. We get to do more things. We don't take donations. We don't do anything other than help people and occasionally share what we learn. And if you'll go to the very last slide, I'd be happy to take some pictures if anything comes up here. But amongst the various things I get to do is write books along with my research and build things to help people. Every poster behind me is a book or a research project. We make these movie posters every time we do one of these projects. But one of the books I'm working on is titled Small Sacrifices. And it's about this idea that helping other people actually makes your life better. In fact, I love this simple idea of what purpose is. The old saying that the world gets better when old men plant trees. They'll never rest under the shade of the tree that they planted, but someone will. Someday, someone that isn't them will have a better life because of something they did. You get to do that too. I know you're not old, and not all of you are men, which is wonderful. But you can start planting trees today. You don't have to wait. Don't wait till you've made it. Don't wait until you feel like you have something to contribute. All of you have something to contribute today, right now. In fact, the best way to learn how to do something is to do it, to go out and build things to make people's lives better. It's not easy. It is very hard. Not everything we build works. But we have the chance to truly change the world. And all of this work, all the inventions, the literally billions of data points I have had the chance to analyze over the course of my career, says a lot of different things. But if I were to sum it up all right now, if you want an amazing life, you have to give an amazing life to someone else. So thank you very much. I didn't go into any technical stuff. If anyone wants to know about the algorithms or about the specifics, throw a question up. I'm happy to answer those questions right now. If you want to know more about some of the stories, feel free to ask those questions as well. I would love to dive in. So let me know if anyone has had a curiosity. Otherwise, I will keep rambling madly, which is something I always enjoy doing.